Section 1. Waking in the Eternal City. Word count target 1,800 minus 2,000. Below is the full Section 1 draft. You awaken in the heart of the Roman Empire, in the century when the empire had reached its greatest strength. Perhaps in the age of Emperor Trajan or Hadrian, when the boundaries stretched from Britain in the northwest to the deserts of Arabia in the east, and from the Danube in the north to the sands of Egypt in the south. Yet the grand borders of empire mean little in this moment, for you are not a senator or an emperor, but a simple resident of Rome itself, one among a million people packed tightly into a city of stone, brick and timber. The first sound you hear is not the cry of a rooster, but the groan of wooden shutters being pulled open. The air, thick with smoke from last night's cooking fires, carries the faint but unmistakable scent of sewage drifting upward from the street below. You live in an insula, a crowded apartment building of several stories, cheaply constructed and prone to fire or collapse. Your family rents a small room here, no more than a cramped space with rough plaster walls and little furniture beyond straw mattresses and perhaps a wooden stool. The wealthy dwell in domus, private houses with courtyards and mosaic floors. But for most citizens, life is lived high above the street, stacked floor upon floor in precarious dwellings. Water is scarce in the upper stories. If you are lucky, a public fountain is within walking distance. Already, the streets echo with the footsteps of slaves and children sent to fetch water in clay jars. Rome boasts aqueducts that bring clean water from miles away, but this abundance is rationed unevenly. Grand fountains and public baths overflow with water, but in your insula you must make do with carrying what you can. The weight of the amphora digs into your shoulder, a reminder that every necessity of life requires labor. If you step into the street, the day reveals itself in layers of noise and activity. The narrow cobbled road is barely wide enough for carts to pass, yet it is choked with vendors setting up their stalls. Bakers carry baskets of loaves from ovens that have been burning since before dawn. The bread is coarse, often mixed with cheaper grains like barley or millet, for pure wheat is costly. The poor will eat their bread with olives, cheese, or perhaps lentils, while the rich dine on meat and fish, delivered fresh from distant provinces. You notice the sweepers at work, or at least pretending to work. The city struggles with its filth. Human waste is tossed into the gutters, sometimes collected in pots to be sold as fertilizer. Donkeys and mules leave their droppings on the street, and though some are cleared away, much remains to mingle with dust and spilled wine. The air is a mixture of odors intolerable, others overwhelming. The city is alive with layers of class and occupation. A senator in his litter passes by, carried on the shoulders of slaves. His toga is cumbersome, yet it marks his status unmistakably. A group of laborers follows not far behind, their tunics short and stained from work. You might envy their strong limbs, but not their endless toil. Freedmen, the once enslaved who have earned or bought their liberty, fill the shops, running small trades. They may be prosperous, but their origins are never forgotten. Above all, the presence of slaves is everywhere, tending fires, hauling loads, whispering at the heels of their masters. It is estimated that as many as 1 in 3 inhabitants of Rome is enslaved. Their silent presence makes the city function, though rarely do free citizens think of them except as property. The day progresses slowly, as it always does in Rome. The sun climbs higher, heating the walls of the insula until the rooms grow stifling. Many leave their homes for the shaded porticos or the public baths. Work is performed in small shops that open directly onto the street. A blacksmith hammers endlessly at iron, his sparks flying dangerously close to the hem of passing tunics. A cobbler sits cross-legged, stitching sandals that must be sold cheaply to compete with imported goods. These shops are often family businesses, handed down or operated with the help of slaves. If you follow the streets farther, you notice the endless construction. Rome is a city that constantly repairs itself, for fires and collapses are frequent. The emperor and magistrates boast of new forums, basilicas, and temples, but the ordinary resident sees only scaffolding, dust, and the clang of hammers. Builders are everywhere, mixing lime mortar and stacking bricks. The famous marble monuments of Rome are admired by visitors, yet behind their grandeur are years of toil from workers who live and die in obscurity. At midday, the noise softens slightly. Those who can afford it rest in shaded courtyards, while the poor seek whatever shelter they can find. Street food vendors remain busy. Chickpeas roasted with salt or bread soaked in wine are sold to passers-by. For the wealthier, cooks prepare meals of fish with garum, a fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans despite its strong smell. The diet of the people reveals much. While the empire is vast and rich, the nutrition of its masses depends on the steady arrival of grain shipments from Africa and Sicily. Without these, Rome itself would starve. By afternoon, the city resumes its rhythm. The baths open their doors, and here you see another side of Rome. The bathhouse is more than a place to wash. It is the center of social life, where men of various classes mingle, argue, and relax. The water is heated by Hypercaust's ingenious systems of underground furnaces that warm the floors and walls. For a small fee, even a poor man may enjoy a soak, though the wealthy boast of private baths at home. The chatter of politics, gossip, and business fills the air, echoing off marble walls. As the day wanes, torches and oil lamps illuminate the streets. The shadows grow longer, and the dangers of the city emerge. Crime is common, especially in the twisting alleys of the Subura district. Bands of youths roam in search of trouble, while beggars settle at the corners, their outstretched hands illuminated by flickering light. The watchmen patrol, but their numbers are limited. Fires remain the greatest fear, for a single spark in a crowded insula can ignite a catastrophe. Residents sleep uneasily, always alert to the smell of smoke. Yet, despite all dangers, Rome persists. It thrives not only because of emperors and armies, but because of the countless ordinary people who carry water, bake bread, clean streets, and build walls. Their names are forgotten, yet their labor sustains the empire. You, as one of them, live a life that is harsh, uncertain, and noisy, but also part of something vast and enduring. As you close your shutters against the night air, you may wonder, is this city, so mighty and crowded, truly eternal? Or is it like the fragile insula in which you sleep, always one spark away from collapse. Section 2. Work, food, and faith in the eternal city. Morning has passed, and you find yourself woven into the slow but steady current of life in Rome. The city does not truly sleep, but it does move in predictable rhythms, set not by the passing of hours on a clock. There are no mechanical clocks yet, but by the rising and setting of the sun, by market bells, and by the daily routines that have been carried on for generations. In this section, let us wander more deeply into three great pillars of ordinary Roman existence: work, food, and faith. Work. The endless labor of the masses. For most residents of Rome, survival depends on steady labor. A man without work risks hunger, and a woman without tasks risks being seen as idle or even dishonorable. The empire may be ruled by emperors and senators, but it is held up by craftsmen, shopkeepers, dock workers, and laborers whose names are absent from every history scroll. Jobs are diverse, though rarely glamorous. On the banks of the Tiber, bargemen unload shipments from across the empire, grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, marble from Greece, and spices from the distant east. The port of Ostia, some miles away, is the lifeline of Rome. Barges float upriver with goods, and endless crews toil to lift them, cart them, and distribute them into the heart of the city. In the marketplaces, shopkeepers display their wares in small stalls that open directly onto the street. These are often family businesses, with fathers cutting meat, mothers arranging vegetables, and children fetching water or sweeping dust. Their profits are slim, and competition is constant. Price controls are sometimes imposed by emperors, particularly on grain, but enforcement is inconsistent. Artisans fill entire districts. The Subura is notorious for its crowded workshops, where cobblers stitch sandals late into the night, weavers work looms with rhythmic repetition, and blacksmiths hammer iron for tools, nails, and horseshoes. Work is repetitive, often loud, and done in dark, smoke-filled spaces. Yet these trades are essential. A broken sandal, a dull knife, or a cracked pot could mean hardship for an ordinary family. Slaves form another layer of this working world. They are everywhere, working not just in private homes but in shops, offices, and fields. Many are educated Greeks, serving as tutors or scribes, while others break stone in quarries or labor as rowers in the galleys. Slavery is so ingrained in Roman life that few question it. Freedom is possible, for manumission is common, but the stigma of slavery never fully fades. Still, for a slave, hope often lies in hard work, in loyalty to a master who may grant freedom after years of service. Food, feeding a million mouths. If work is constant, food is the city's obsession. Feeding a population of over 1 million is a logistical feat unlike any seen before. Rome depends on grain above all else. Grain. Ships carrying Egyptian wheat are so critical that the emperors themselves are judged by the stability of supply. A failure of the grain fleet can lead to riots in the Forum within days. The diet of the average Roman is simple, though varied depending on wealth. Bread is the staple. It is baked in large communal ovens, sometimes operated by bakers' guilds, sometimes by individual shops. Bread is cheap for citizens because the government subsidizes grain in what is known as the annona. This grain dole provides monthly rations to hundreds of thousands of Romans, ensuring that at least the poorest have bread. Without this policy, starvation and unrest would be inevitable. Alongside bread, beans and lentils provide protein. Vegetables such as cabbage, onions, and leeks are common, along with olives and cheese. Meat is rarer for the poor, though sausages or scraps from butchers may find their way into a meal. Fish, fresh or salted, is more common, particularly sardines or anchovies preserved for long transport. And then there is garum, the pungent fish sauce beloved by Romans, made by fermenting fish innards with salt until they liquefy. Garum is poured over nearly every dish. To modern taste, it might seem unbearable, but to Romans, it is a treasured condiment, both flavorful and believed to have health benefits. Factories along the Spanish coast and North Africa export enormous amphorae of garum, and its trade is a lucrative industry. For the wealthy, meals are elaborate feasts. Exotic fruits from Syria, oysters from Britain, game birds from the countryside, and honey cakes drizzled with wine grace their tables. Couches arranged around a low table allow diners to recline, eating with their fingers while slaves serve course after course. Entertainment often accompanies these meals: musicians, poets, even dancers. Yet while the wealthy feast in luxury, most Romans dine quickly and humbly, often standing in taverns or sitting in cramped kitchens. Public eateries, called thermopolia, line the streets. These serve hot meals to those without kitchens at home, particularly residents of the insulae. Counters made of stone, with embedded jars for soups and stews, allow passers-by to purchase food cheaply. The smell of sizzling sausages, spiced wine, or lentil stew drifts from these stalls, mixing with the less pleasant odors of the street. Thus, in food as in housing, the empire reveals its inequalities: abundance for some, survival rations for many, and starvation only a shipment delay away. Faith, the gods in every corner beyond work and food. Daily life in Rome is shaped by religion, though not in the way modern listeners might imagine. The Romans are not consumed by theology or deep philosophy of the divine. Instead, their religion is practical, ritualistic, and omnipresent. At home, the family shrine, the lararium, is the heart of worship. Small statues of the household gods, the lares and penates, guard the family's prosperity. Each morning, offerings of wine, grain, or incense are made to these spirits. Without their blessing, Romans believe the home would fall into disorder. Public religion is equally visible. Temples line the forum, dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and countless other gods. These temples are not quiet places for contemplation, but active centers of civic life. Sacrifices of animals, often sheep, pigs, or bulls, are conducted by priests in elaborate ceremonies, accompanied by prayers, music, and the reading of omens. The entrails of animals are inspected for signs from the gods, for the Romans are convinced that divine favor determines the success of every endeavor. Religion is also political. Emperors are deified after death, their images set up in temples. To swear loyalty to Rome often means swearing loyalty to the emperor's divine spirit. Refusing to sacrifice to the emperor is not only impious but treasonous, a fact that will in later centuries bring Christians into conflict with Roman law. Festivals are frequent, breaking up the monotony of daily life. Some honor gods of agriculture, others gods of war, and still others the spirits of the dead. During the Saturnalia, for example, the usual social order is reversed. Slaves are allowed to dine with masters, gifts are exchanged, and misrule is temporarily permitted. For a brief moment, the city loosens its rigid hierarchies. Religion extends into every act. A traveler sets out only after consulting omens. A farmer plants only after the proper rites. A new building is begun only after a sacrifice at the site. Even those who doubt in private perform the rituals in public. For neglect is seen as dangerous not only to the individual, but to the community. The gods, after all, demand attention, and their favor ensures the safety of Rome itself, the web that holds the city together. When you stand back and observe the city, you see how these three pillars work: food and faith interlock to hold Rome together. Laborers and slaves keep the city supplied. Bakers and traders ensure the grain flows into bread, and rituals of worship provide a sense of stability in a world often shaken by fire, famine, or invasion. Yet even in their strength, these pillars are fragile. A failed harvest in Egypt, a disruption at Ostia, or a scandal among priests could ripple across the city with alarming speed. Rome thrives on order, but it is an order that requires constant maintenance. As evening falls once again, and lamps flicker in the windows of Insuli, you may ask yourself, is the life of ordinary Romans truly secure, or is it always balanced on the edge of disorder, dependent on ships arriving, rituals performed, and endless hands at work? Section 3. Leisure, family, and the fragile balance of the city. The working day in Rome does not end with the fall of the sun. For a city of more than 1 million souls, the hours after labor are filled with noise, activity, and the search for diversion. Leisure is not a luxury for the elite alone. It is woven into the fabric of Roman life at every level, though in very different forms depending on wealth and station. Leisure, games, baths, and the pursuit of escape. Public entertainment is one of the most striking features of the city. The Colosseum, vast and imposing, dominates the skyline, its arcades filled with statues, and its seating vast enough to hold tens of thousands. Here, the masses gather for spectacles, gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and reenactments of famous battles. The events are bloody, often cruel, but also thrilling to those who crowd the stone steps. For many ordinary Romans, attendance is not a choice, but a privilege extended by the emperor, who offers these spectacles as gifts to the people. Bread is given to the poor. Games are given to the restless panem et circenses. Bread and circuses, a phrase that captures the empire's strategy of social control. Yet not all leisure is so violent. The Circus Maximus, larger still than the Colosseum, offers the thunder of chariot races. Teams distinguished by colors reds, greens, blues, and whites compete, and the city is divided by fierce loyalties to these factions. A victory by one's favored team brings excitement, pride, and endless argument in taverns and streets. Unlike gladiatorial contests, which celebrate the emperor's power, chariot races carry the energy of true competition, and they remain beloved by the people. For the ordinary man, however, leisure is often simpler. Taverns provide cheap wine, sometimes watered down, sometimes spiced. Dice games clatter across tables, despite laws that technically forbid gambling. Storytellers gather small crowds, reciting epic tales or gossiping about political intrigue. Street musicians pluck lyres or play flutes, filling alleys with music. The rich may host poetry readings or attend theatre in the grand stone amphitheatres, but the poor enjoy shadow plays and improvised performances on street corners. The baths remain another central space of relaxation. Even after the day's labor, Romans flocked to the thermae, where hot and cold pools, steam rooms, and exercise yards provide escape. Wrestling, ball games, and simple conversation occupy the time. The baths are among the most democratic spaces of Rome, where senators and plebeians might share the same waters, though not without an awareness of rank. For a small fee, nearly anyone can enjoy them, and their popularity ensures that almost every neighborhood has access to one. Family, the quiet center of Roman life beyond the public spaces. Leisure continues in private. The Roman household is small by modern standards, yet it is the anchor of life for both rich and poor. For the elite, the domus is a sprawling residence with painted walls, mosaics underfoot, and open courtyards for light and air. For the poor, the insula is narrow and dark, but even here family ties are strong. Parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives share cramped quarters, with possessions kept minimal. Privacy is scarce, yet the bonds of kinship provide stability in a city that can otherwise feel overwhelming. The Roman family is governed by the authority of the father, the paterfamilias. His power extends legally over his children and even his adult sons. As long as he lives, he may arrange marriages, oversee finances, and command obedience. In practice, this authority is often softened by custom and affection, but the principle remains strong. The household is a miniature reflection of the order of the state, with one man at its head. Women hold important roles, though rarely in public life. Within the household, a woman manages domestic tasks, oversees slaves if the family owns them, and ensures the household gods are honored. Wealthy women may wield influence behind the scenes, shaping family alliances or guiding their children's futures. Among the poor, women contribute through labor, whether by selling goods in the market, spinning wool, or working alongside their husbands. Children are raised with discipline. Boys learn to read, write, and recite the works of great poets. Some are tutored privately, others attend simple schools. Girls receive less formal education, though they are often taught to manage household tasks from an early age. Childhood is short, and by adolescence, most children are expected to contribute to the family's survival. Infant mortality is high, and parents often steel themselves against loss. Yet love is not absent. Small toys, carvings, and lullabies speak to the universal tenderness of family life, even in a world often harsh and uncertain. The fragile balance of city life. If you step back again into the streets, you notice how carefully balanced this entire way of life is. Every detail of leisure, family, work, and religion rests on fragile foundations. The grain supply must flow without interruption. The aqueducts must carry water daily, or fountains run dry. The fires in the insulae must be contained, or entire districts can vanish overnight. Crime must be checked, or chaos will spread through the alleys. Even the games and festivals, so central to Roman identity, are a tool of stability. A restless crowd, denied bread or distracted from its amusements, can quickly turn violent, shouting for reforms or blaming the emperor. And so the city is always watched, always regulated. Prefects oversee the grain supply. Guards patrol the streets. Slaves are punished harshly for disobedience. Rituals are performed endlessly to secure divine favor. Rome is mighty, yet its might is not effortless. It requires endless management, coordination, and labor from millions of hands, most of which remain nameless. For you, an ordinary resident, the rhythm continues without pause. Tomorrow you will rise in your insula, fetch water, labor at your task, eat bread, honor the gods, and seek rest in the baths or taverns. It is a cycle repeated not only by you but by nearly every one of the million souls crammed within Rome's walls. Some may rise in wealth, others may fall into poverty, but the structure remains the same. Reflection, the eternal city. As you drift towards sleep, it is tempting to believe that Rome will last forever. Its monuments of stone appear indestructible, its armies unconquerable, its gods ever watchful. Yet from within, you see how thin the thread is that holds daily life together. A failed harvest, a fire, or a corrupt magistrate could disrupt the fragile balance. The question lingers, as it did even among Romans themselves: is Rome eternal because of its strength, or is its strength merely an illusion, maintained by endless toil and constant vigilance? Story 2. The Roman Soldier. A Life of Discipline and Endless Marches. Section 1. Enlisting and Living Under the Standards. The grandeur of the Roman Empire, so visible in its marble forums and bustling markets, rests on the shoulders of its soldiers. Without the legions, the aqueducts would dry, the grain ships would falter, and the emperor's decrees would be little more than words carved in stone. Yet to be a soldier of Rome was not to live in constant glory, as poets and sculptors might suggest. It was, more often, to endure endless repetition, training, marching, digging, and obeying orders without question. The call to arms, enlistment, and oath. Imagine yourself as a young man from the Italian countryside, or perhaps from a recently conquered province. You are strong enough to carry heavy loads, healthy enough to endure hardship, and most importantly, willing to submit your life to Rome. Recruitment officers inspect you carefully. Height, chest, and limbs are measured. A crooked back or weak constitution means rejection, for Rome needs endurance above all. You must also swear loyalty not to the Senate or to abstract ideals, but directly to the emperor. This sacred oath, the sacramentum, binds you to obedience until death. To break it is treason, punishable by execution. Once accepted, your life changes completely. You are no longer an individual, but a member of a legion, one of roughly 5,000 men divided into cohorts and centuries. The legion is more than a fighting force. It is a machine of order, a society in miniature, and a family to which you now belong more than your own blood kin. Training, discipline above all. The first months are devoted to training. This is not glamorous. Wooden swords twice as heavy as real ones are thrust into your hands, forcing your muscles to strengthen quickly. You are drilled to march 20 miles in full kit without breaking formation. Running, swimming, digging, and lifting are constant. You are taught to carry not only weapons but a load of supplies, rations, tools, and stakes for fortifications, sometimes exceeding 60 pounds. Discipline is the foundation. Orders must be obeyed instantly and without hesitation. Punishments are harsh. A soldier who falls asleep on guard duty may be stoned to death by his comrades. A unit that shows cowardice may undergo decimation, the execution of every 10th man, chosen by lot, as a lesson to the rest. Such severity ensures that fear of commanders outweighs fear of the enemy. Yet camaraderie also develops. You share bread and hardship with your tent mates, usually 8 men assigned to one tent, forming the smallest unit of the legion. Bonds forged in training will carry into battle, where trust in the man beside you is as vital as trust in your shield. The daily routine, beyond the battlefield. Life in the legion is defined not by constant combat but by constant work. The image of a soldier as a warrior is only partly true. More often he is a laborer in armor. A typical day begins at sunrise. Trumpets sound, rousing you from sleep. If encamped, duties begin with caring for equipment, sharpening swords, checking armor, mending boots. Then come drills, marching in formation, practicing maneuvers, or constructing fortifications. For Rome never travels without security. At the end of every march, the first task is to build a fortified camp, complete with ditches, ramparts, and wooden palisades. No matter how tired, soldiers dig until defenses are raised. Rations are issued, grain, which must be ground into flour and baked into bread or porridge. A small portion of meat, vinegar diluted with water for drink. Food is plain, monotonous, but sufficient. You eat quickly, for duties press on. Guard duty consumes many hours. Watches are rotated through the night, for vigilance is constant. Fires must be maintained, weapons kept ready. Even in peacetime, danger never seems distant. Raids, ambushes, and mutinies have been the undoing of careless legions before. In addition to military duties, soldiers act as engineers and builders. Roads, bridges, and aqueducts are constructed by legionary hands. Fortresses rise in distant provinces, not by contractors, but by soldiers with picks and shovels. In this way, the legion is both an army and a workforce, spreading Roman infrastructure across the empire. Pay and the burden of service. For all this labor, you receive pay, but not always promptly. A standard legionary in the early empire might earn 225 denarii a year, later increased to 300. From this sum, deductions are made for food, clothing, and equipment. What remains is modest. A soldier cannot expect luxury, though savings might eventually buy a small farm upon retirement. Service is long up to 25 years. Only after this time are you granted full discharge, often with a pension, or land in a colony. Many never live to see it, for war, disease, and exhaustion take their toll. Yet the promise of land, citizenship for provincials, and honor drives men to endure. Identity. The legion as family. Over time, you cease to think of yourself as an isolated individual. Your identity is consumed by your unit, your standard, your eagle. The legion's silver eagle, carried by the standard bearer, is sacred. To lose it in battle is the deepest disgrace imaginable. To defend it is to defend the honor of thousands. Songs, chants, and shared rituals bind soldiers together. You march in rhythm, fight in cohesion, and even suffer punishment collectively. The discipline that shapes you is not only external but internal until obedience becomes second nature. The legion transforms you into part of a machine greater than yourself, an enduring instrument of Rome's will. The boredom between battles. What surprises many is not the ferocity of battle, but the long stretches without it. Campaigns involve weeks of marching, digging, and waiting. Skirmishes may be brief, with more time spent building camps and hauling supplies than clashing with enemies. A soldier may serve years before ever seeing major combat. During these idle periods, small tasks fill the hours: repairing armor, writing letters if literate, gambling with dice, carving wood, or sharing stories around the fire. Some soldiers take local wives or form attachments in garrison towns. Others save money by working additional trades permitted within the camp. The legion is a community as much as an army, self-sufficient in all but name. Reflection. Duty without end. As the sun sets on another day, you lie in your tent, the sounds of comrades nearby, the eagle standard guarded in the camp's heart. You have marched, dug, eaten your ration, and endured the weight of discipline. Tomorrow will be the same. The poet may speak of glory, the emperor may promise honor, but for you, the reality is repetition. Drill, march, dig, guard, eat, sleep. Yet perhaps it is this very monotony that makes Rome's army so enduring. A machine that never tires, composed of men who have learned to live in obedience, prepared always for the next march. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, one question remains: when war finally comes, after years of routine, will you prove yourself worthy of the eagle you serve, or will the long grind have dulled the edge you need to survive? Section 2. Campaigns, marches, and the machinery of empire. When you think of Rome's armies, you might imagine grand battles, legions clashing with barbarian hordes, trumpets sounding, eagles raised. Yet in truth, the defining feature of a soldier's life is not the clash of arms but the endless journey from one place to another. Rome conquered not with speed but with patience, with soldiers who marched further, dug deeper, and built stronger than any foe. The march, Rome on the move. At dawn the horns sound, and the legion breaks camp. Each man lifts his burden, the full kit of armor, shield, sword, rations, tools, and the heavy stakes for fortifications. In total, this pack may weigh up to 60–70 pounds, a crushing load to carry day after day. So heavy was this burden that soldiers earned the nickname Muli Mariani, Marius's mules, after the general who had first reorganized the army into such efficient marching units. The column stretches for miles, disciplined and orderly. Each cohort takes its place, with cavalry on the flanks and baggage trains behind. Pack animals groan under the weight of additional supplies. The standard bearer marches at the front, the eagle gleaming in the light, a reminder of what all this toil represents. The march is steady, relentless. 20 miles in a day is common, sometimes more. Roads, when available, make travel easier, for Rome has invested heavily in stone-paved highways that cut across mountains and valleys. But in hostile or uncharted lands, soldiers themselves clear paths, fell trees, and lay timber. Mud, snow, and rain are endured without pause. To fall behind is to invite punishment. Building camps, a fortress every night. When the day's march ends, the work is not over. A Roman army never sleeps unprotected. At each stop, no matter how brief, a fortified camp is built. This is one of the most distinctive features of Roman discipline and one of the most tedious tasks for the soldier. The camp begins with a ditch, dug by hand, surrounding the entire perimeter. The earth removed is piled inward to form a rampart. Wooden stakes, carried by the soldiers themselves, are driven into the rampart to create a palisade. Gates are set, and streets within the camp are laid out in the same orderly fashion each time, so that even in a foreign land, a soldier can navigate the camp as though it were a small city. Inside, tents are arranged by century and cohort, with the commander's tent at the center, alongside the sacred standards. The latrines are dug outside the walls, trenches, covered for sanitation. The effort is exhausting, particularly after a full day of marching, but it ensures safety. An enemy attack at night will meet not weary men scattered on the ground, but a disciplined force behind walls and ditches. This nightly labor illustrates the Roman way of war, not brilliance in a single charge, but steady, methodical preparation. Even rest comes only after the spade has done its work. The burden of supplies a marching army consumes immense quantities of food. Each soldier carries rations for several days: grain, dried meat, and vinegar. But longer campaigns require steady resupply. Supply trains follow the army, guarded closely, for without them, the legion cannot endure. Grain remains the staple. Soldiers grind it themselves, baking simple bread or boiling it into porridge. Meat is issued irregularly, often from local livestock taken during campaigns. Wine is diluted with water and vinegar mixed in to kill impurities. Salt is precious, carried carefully, for it preserves food and seasons otherwise bland rations. Foraging parties are sent out constantly, gathering supplies from the countryside. This practice sustains the army but also burdens local populations, who must surrender grain, animals, and timber. Sometimes it is done peacefully, with payment. Often it is enforced by steel. Thus, The presence of a Roman army is both a shield and a strain. It protects provinces but also consumes them. Encounters with local populations. As the legion moves, it encounters the peoples of the provinces. In friendly lands, towns provide supplies, markets open to sell goods, and merchants follow the army to profit from its needs. Soldiers may barter, gamble, or form relationships with locals, though strict discipline is maintained to prevent disorder. In hostile lands, the encounters are harsher. Villages are burned to deny resources to the enemy. Crops are seized, livestock driven away. For the Romans, war is not only about defeating armies, but about breaking the ability of enemies to resist. To a soldier, this often means long days of marching, seizing grain, and destroying fields. The grandeur of empire is felt most directly by peasants, whose homes are raised in the name of Roman order. Yet sometimes soldiers settle in these very lands. Upon retirement, land grants are issued in conquered provinces. Entire colonies spring up, populated by veterans who bring Roman customs, language, and architecture with them. In this way, the endless marches not only secure the empire but extend its culture permanently into distant corners. Engineering and construction. Campaigns are rarely pure destruction. The Roman soldier is as much builder as warrior. Armies construct bridges across rivers, often temporary but sturdy enough to move thousands of men and animals. They cut roads through forests, sometimes leaving behind permanent highways that still endure centuries later. Fortresses are raised on frontiers, complete with stone walls, towers, and gates. Such projects may feel dull to the men who labor on them, yet they form the backbone of Roman control. A road once laid allows legions to move swiftly to put down rebellion. A fortress secures a border against raids. A bridge ensures that supplies can flow without interruption. In this way, the toil of the soldier outlasts his own life, shaping landscapes for generations. Hardships on campaign. Despite discipline, campaigns are harsh. Weather spares no one. Soldiers march through rain that soaks their cloaks, snow that numbs their hands, or sun that scorches their heads. Cloaks, sandals, and simple tunics offer limited protection. Wounds are common, not only from battle, but from blisters, infections, and accidents. Disease claims more lives than swords. Water from unfamiliar rivers may sicken entire cohorts. Dysentery spreads quickly in camps if latrines are poorly maintained. Malaria lingers in marshlands. Even the most disciplined legion cannot fully escape the frailty of the human body. Morale rises and falls with fortune. Victories bring pride and spoils, while defeats sow despair. Long campaigns far from home leave men weary, longing for the farms and families they left behind. Yet desertion is rare, for punishments are severe, and the bonds of comradeship hold men steady. The machinery of empire. Seen from above, the legion in campaign resembles a moving city, its roads cut through wilderness, its camps built and dismantled daily, its men bound by iron discipline. It advances steadily, reshaping the land, consuming resources, and leaving behind traces of Rome in every ditch and stone. For the individual soldier, it is monotonous. March, dig, eat, guard, march again. For the empire, it is magnificent. Such persistence wears down enemies, secures provinces, and extends borders. Rome's conquests are not sudden strokes of genius, but the cumulative effect of countless weary feet pressing forward, day after day, year after year. Reflection: the weight of the march. As you lie down in your tent after another exhausting day, the walls of the camp secure around you, one thought presses in: will the march ever truly end? 25 years of service may lie ahead. The road stretches endlessly into provinces unknown, each day repeating the last. The poet in Rome may speak of heroes and victories, but you know the reality. Empire is built not on glory, but on endurance. And so you wonder, when future generations admire Rome's triumphs, will they remember the march, the ditch, the endless grind? Or will those details, so heavy in your body, vanish into silence? Section 3: Duty, Identity, and the Endless Shadow of Rome. To serve in the legions is to surrender one's own life to something larger. For 25 years, perhaps more, the soldier is no longer simply a man from a village or a farm. He is a fragment of Rome itself. His voice joins the shout of the cohort. His footsteps blend into the rhythm of the march. His spear adds one more point to the wall of steel. Individually he is small, but together the legion becomes an unstoppable force. Yet beneath the armor, each man carries his own private thoughts. At night, when the camp is quiet and only the watchfires burn, memories stir. The smell of olive trees in a distant homeland, the laughter of children left behind, the uncertainty of whether one will ever return. Rome demands loyalty, but it cannot erase longing. Discipline as identity. Discipline is more than routine. It shapes the very identity of the Roman soldier. To obey orders without hesitation, to march despite exhaustion, to dig when every muscle aches, this is what defines the legionary. A soldier who hesitates weakens the line. A soldier who disobeys endangers all. Punishments are harsh: flogging, fines, even death for grave offenses. Cowardice is met with decimation, the execution of one man in 10, chosen by lot, while his comrades strike the blows. Such cruelty is rare, but its memory hangs over every soldier. Fear enforces unity, but so too does pride. To be a legionary is to stand in the tradition of centuries, to wear the eagle upon one's chest, to know that emperors themselves rely on the strength of your cohort. The soldier and the state Rome promises much to those who endure. At the end of service, there may be land, citizenship, and wealth. For some, the dream is simple: a small farm, a family, peace at last. For others, military life becomes identity itself, and they re-enlist, rising to the rank of centurion, their scars transformed into symbols of honor. But always the soldier remains bound to the state. He fights not for himself, but for the Senate and people of Rome, or later for the emperor. His victories expand borders he may never see again. His labor builds roads on which others will travel. His what secures provinces he may never call home. He lives in the present, but his actions ripple forward into centuries. The weight of time. What does it mean to march for years across strange lands? never rooted, always moving. Time itself begins to blur. The calendar of civilian life harvest, festivals, family milestones fades away. Instead, time is measured by campaigns, by winters spent in garrisons, by the rise and fall of commanders. A soldier might spend a decade on the Rhine, staring at misty forests, then be ordered to Syria, where deserts stretch without end. The world becomes vast, yet strangely narrow, for each day repeats the last. March, camp, guard, march again. In this endless cycle, years vanish. Only when gray hairs creep into his beard does the soldier realize how much of life has slipped away into the rhythm of Rome. The shadow of mortality, for all the discipline, all the preparation, death is never far. A single arrow, a fever, a wound that festers, these can end a career in an instant. Many die unnamed, their bodies buried hurriedly beyond the camp walls, their memory carried only by comrades. Others fall in great battles, their names recorded in histories, though even these fade with time. Yet death, too, is part of duty. To die for Rome is seen as honorable, though for the man himself, honor is of little comfort. The promise lies instead in legacy. Roads, walls, and cities stand where once he marched. The empire lives on, even if he does not. Rome's endless march. The individual soldier ages, retires, and eventually dies. But the legion never rests. As one cohort disbands, another rises. As veterans lay down their swords, recruits take them up. Rome's armies continue to march north into Britannia, east into Parthia, across rivers, mountains, and deserts. The empire itself becomes eternal because its soldiers embrace the endless march. From the perspective of centuries, the legion is less an army than a machine, powered by human endurance. The faces change, but the discipline, the routine, and the burden remain constant. Rome expands not through sudden brilliance, but through the slow, grinding footsteps of men who accept the weight of armor, the ache of muscles, and the call of duty. Reflection: a life for Rome. As the story of the Roman soldier closes, we are left with a paradox. His life is monotonous, repetitive, often harsh, and yet it is this very monotony that builds empire. He does not live for himself alone, but for something greater, something that outlasts him. To be a Roman soldier is to vanish into the march, to surrender individuality to the whole. Yet in that surrender lies a kind of immortality. His sweat becomes the mortar of empire, his march the rhythm of history. Rome's triumphs are his triumphs, though the poets and emperors will claim the glory. And so we return to where we began. Discipline and endless marches. They are the burden of the soldier and the secret of Rome's endurance. When all else fades, the battles, the emperors, the victories, it is the soldier's steady footsteps that remain, echoing down the centuries. Story 3. The Medieval Monk, Silence, Study, and the Cloistered Life. Section 1. Entering the cloister, the weight of silence, the monastery was a world apart. To step inside its gates was to leave behind not only family, possessions, and ambitions, but also the rhythms of ordinary life. In the medieval world, where towns bustled with merchants and peasants bent over fields, the monastery stood as an island of silence. Stone walls enclosed it, not only to keep intruders out but to remind those inside that they had chosen separation from the world. A young man entering this life did not arrive suddenly. Often he came first as an oblate or novice, sometimes given by his family at a young age. Other times, he was an adult who sought refuge from the turmoil of the outside world, perhaps after war, illness, or a crisis of faith. Whatever the reason, the monastery demanded total transformation. One surrendered his name, his clothing, and even his will to become part of a community where obedience and silence ruled. The first steps. When a novice arrived, he was stripped of his worldly garments and given the habit of the order. This simple robe, often coarse and plain, symbolized humility. The ceremony was quiet, for it was not meant to glorify the man, but to emphasize his surrender. He bowed before the altar, pledged obedience to the rule of the order, and entered a life where each day unfolded not according to his desires, but to the steady rhythm of bells. The most influential guide for this life was the Rule of Saint Benedict, written centuries earlier, but deeply influential across medieval Europe. Its commands were precise, almost tedious in detail, and yet they shaped the monastery into a world of order. The monk was to rise at appointed hours, pray at fixed times, labor with his hands, and avoid idleness at all costs. His speech was limited, for silence guarded the soul from distraction. The architecture of silence. The buildings of the monastery reflected this structure. The cloister lay at the center, a square courtyard surrounded by covered walkways. Here monks paced slowly in meditation, their footsteps echoing against stone. Around the cloister, other rooms branched outward, dormitories with rows of narrow beds, the refectory where meals were eaten in silence, the chapter house where daily instructions were read, and the scriptorium, where books were copied by hand. Even the church, the heart of the monastery, spoke of discipline. Its stone walls were thick, its windows narrow, allowing in only muted light. Nothing here was designed to dazzle or entertain. Instead, its very austerity focused the mind inward, away from distraction, toward prayer and contemplation. The hours of the day. Time in the monastery was not measured by personal preference, but by the canonical hours. 7 times a day and once in the night the bell called the monks to prayer. Matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime in the early morning, terce mid-morning, sext at noon, nan mid-afternoon, vespers in the evening, and compline at night. Each time, the monks gathered in the choir stalls of the church. Psalms were chanted, scriptures recited, prayers murmured in unison. The cycle repeated endlessly, day after day, year after year. In the outside world, seasons were marked by planting and harvest. Inside the monastery, time was marked by the sound of the bell and the rhythm of prayer. Silence at table. Even meals were part of devotion. In the refectory, monks ate together at long wooden tables, but they did not speak. Instead, one monk read aloud from scripture or the lives of saints while the others listened in silence, chewing their bread and sipping their watered wine. Meat was often restricted, replaced with vegetables, beans and fish. Fasting was common, especially during Lent, when meals were meager and simple. This silence was not meant to punish, but to discipline. Words could lead to arguments, gossip, or pride. By removing them, monks focused on nourishment as necessity, not pleasure. Eating became a ritual act, one more thread in the tapestry of obedience. Labor as prayer. The rule required that monks labor with their hands. This might mean tending gardens, caring for livestock, brewing ale, baking bread, or repairing the monastery's buildings. Work was not separate from prayer but part of it. To hoe a row of beans was to humble oneself before God. To scrub the floors was to discipline the body. Some monks, especially in larger monasteries, worked in the scriptorium. Here they copied manuscripts by hand, their quills scratching across parchment, hour after hour. Illumination, those colorful decorations of gold leaf and ink, was not mere decoration but an offering to God. To reproduce the words of Scripture or the writings of the Church Fathers was to preserve wisdom for generations to come. The work was tedious, the light dim, and mistakes costly, but patience was itself a form of devotion. The cost of obedience. For all its structure, monastic life was not without struggle. The vows demanded much: poverty, chastity, obedience. To own nothing, to renounce family, to submit every choice to the authority of the abbot. These could weigh heavily. Monks were human, after all. Temptation lurked in the form of longing for home, desire for comfort, or pride in learning. The monastery offered peace, but it also required surrender of the self. The rule of Saint Benedict recognized this. It instructed abbots to treat monks with compassion, to correct gently when possible, but also to enforce discipline when necessary. A monk who disobeyed might be punished with fasting, exclusion from communal meals, or, in severe cases, expulsion. Yet for most, the walls of the cloister were not a prison but a chosen refuge, a different kind of freedom. Strangely, in surrendering worldly freedom, monks found another kind. The outside world was full of uncertainty, wars, famines, plagues, and shifting politics. The monastery, by contrast, offered stability. The bell would always ring at the same hour. The psalms would always be chanted. The work would always return with the dawn. This predictability created a sense of timelessness. Within the walls, centuries could pass with little change. A monk from the 10th century might recognize the life of one from the 12th. In a world often chaotic, the monastery stood as a place where time slowed, almost stopped, allowing the soul to rest in constancy. The weight of silence. Silence was perhaps the most difficult yet most defining aspect of monastic life. Words were permitted only when necessary. Instead, monks communicated with gestures or waited until the designated time in the chapter house. Silence was not emptiness, but discipline, a way of turning inward. At first, a novice might find it oppressive. The absence of chatter at meals, the quiet of the cloister walks, the long hours of prayer broken only by chanting, these could feel heavy. But over time, silence became its own teacher. It stripped away distraction, revealing thoughts and temptations hidden beneath. To live in silence was to confront oneself. The question of purpose. Why, then, would a man choose such a life? The answers varied. Some sought salvation, believing that renouncing the world brought them closer to God. Others sought refuge, escaping the dangers of war or the temptations of wealth. For a few, it was duty. Families sometimes offered sons to the monastery as a way of securing prayers for their souls. Whatever the reason, once inside, the purpose became unified: to seek God through obedience, prayer, and work. The life was not glamorous, not filled with dramatic events or worldly triumphs. It was instead a steady march of days, each blending into the next, each shaped by silence, devotion, and surrender. And so, as we close this first glimpse into the monastery, we are left with a thought. What is the value of such a life? To an outsider, it may seem narrow, even stifling. Yet for the monk, it was a path to eternity, a way of turning from the fleeting noise of the world toward the eternal silence of God. But how did this life, so quiet and cloistered, influence the broader medieval world beyond the monastery walls? How did monks, who renounced society, nonetheless shape it in profound ways? Section 2. Monks and the wider world: preservation, influence, and the hidden power of silence. Although the monastery was a place of retreat, its walls did not entirely shut it off from the world beyond. Paradoxically, monks who renounced society nonetheless shaped it in ways that would echo across centuries. Through their study, their labor, and their devotion, they became custodians of knowledge, quiet forces in politics, and guardians of the memory of the past. The scriptorium, a workshop of memory. If one imagines the heart of the monastery as the church, then its mind lay in the scriptorium. Here, in long, narrow rooms lined with desks, monks bent over parchment, quills in hand, copying texts letter by letter. The work was slow, requiring careful attention. Parchment was costly, mistakes difficult to erase. Yet, through this labor, the words of antiquity survived. Not only scripture, but also works of philosophy, medicine, and history found refuge within monastery walls. Without monks, the writings of classical authors Cicero, Virgil, Aristotle might have vanished entirely during Europe's turbulent centuries. By reproducing these texts, monks unwittingly became bridges between the ancient and modern worlds. Illumination added another layer. Golden letters, intricate borders, tiny painted scenes. These embellishments were offerings of beauty as devotion. They also turned manuscripts into treasures. Each book carried weeks, even months of labor. A single Bible might take years to complete, and within its pages, the patient work of anonymous monks endured long after their lives had ended. Monasteries as centers of learning. Because books were rare, monasteries became centers of learning. Novices studied Latin to chant the Psalms, but beyond that, monasteries preserved and taught grammar, rhetoric, and theology. Some monasteries founded schools, educating not only future monks but also young men destined for service in church or state. Here, silence and study walked hand in hand. Hours spent copying manuscripts honed memory. Repetition of the Psalms shaped language. Study was not pursued for worldly fame but for understanding divine truth. Yet, in preserving and transmitting knowledge, monks ensured that Europe would one day awaken to the intellectual flourishing of the later Middle Ages and Renaissance. The monastic economy. Though monks lived under vows of poverty, monasteries themselves often accumulated wealth. Gifts of land from nobles seeking prayers for their souls expanded their holdings. Over time, many monasteries became vast landlords, managing fields, mills, vineyards, and fisheries. The labor of lay brothers, men who joined the monastery not for study, but for work, sustained this economy. They tilled the soil, harvested crops, tended sheep, brewed ale, and produced cheese. The rule of Saint Benedict declared idleness is the enemy of the soul, and so work was both practical and spiritual. Yet the scale of production meant that monasteries sometimes became important centers of trade and economic life. In an age when famine was a constant threat, monasteries provided food not only for themselves but for travelers, pilgrims, and the poor. Their guest houses welcomed visitors, for hospitality was considered a sacred duty. Thus, though cloistered, monasteries connected to roads, villages, and markets. The abbot's authority. Each monastery was governed by an abbot elected by the community, but wielding authority akin to that of a father. His word carried weight, for obedience was central to monastic life. Yet abbots were not only spiritual guides. They often became figures of influence in local and even national politics. Kings and nobles sought their counsel. Monasteries, because of their lands, owed taxes and provided resources. Some abbots served as royal advisors, mediators in disputes, or even regents. In this way, monks who had turned from the world found themselves shaping it indirectly through the authority of their leaders and the weight of their institutions. The cloister and the village. Around many monasteries, villages grew. Peasants worked the lands of the monastery, and in return, they received protection and spiritual guidance. The monastery's church often became the center of local religious life, hosting masses, festivals, and burials. The villagers may have looked with or at the silent monks who processed to prayer at all hours. To them, the monastery represented holiness, stability, and perhaps mystery. Even if few fully understood the rule, they recognized that the prayers of the monks were believed to support the entire community. Healing and charity. Monks also cared for the sick. Many monasteries maintained infirmaries where herbs and remedies were prepared. Some had rudimentary hospitals for travelers and the poor. The study of medicine, limited though it was, drew upon ancient texts preserved in monastic libraries. Healing was seen as an act of charity, another form of service to God. Charity extended beyond medicine. Monks gave alms to the poor, fed the hungry at the gate, and offered sanctuary to those in distress. In times of war or plague, the monastery might be one of the few places where stability and aid could be found. The tension of withdrawal. Yet always, there remained tension. The rule demanded separation from the world, but monasteries were never entirely free from worldly entanglement. Their lands tied them to economic and political networks. Their manuscripts tied them to intellectual currents. Their prayers tied them to the hopes of laypeople. This paradox defined medieval monasticism. The monks turned inward, yet their very withdrawal made them outwardly influential. The world looked to the monastery for guidance, even as the monks insisted they sought only God. A legacy beyond the walls. Centuries later, when scholars of the Renaissance rediscovered classical learning, they often did so through manuscripts patiently preserved by monks. When towns grew into cities, many traced their beginnings to settlements clustered around monasteries. And when rulers sought legitimacy, they often turned to the prayers and blessing of abbots. The monk's life of silence, prayer, and labor may have seemed narrow, even hidden. Yet its impact was vast. The cloister was a world apart, but it was also a foundation stone of medieval society. The quiet power of silence. Silence, then, was not merely absence of sound. It was the condition that allowed memory to endure, prayer to be offered, and knowledge to be preserved. It gave strength to the monk's labor and lent gravity to his counsel. While knights won battles and kings ruled lands, monks preserved the memory of both. Thus, the cloistered life, though humble and restrained, became a quiet force shaping the medieval world. And so we see that the monk's silence was not isolation, but influence. What appeared withdrawn was, in fact, deeply connected. The monastery may have turned away from noise, but in its stillness, it left a legacy louder than armies or kings. Section 3. Inner struggles, temptation, doubt, and the long road of the spirit. To imagine the monk's life only as quiet prayer and steady discipline is to see but half the truth. Within the stillness of the cloister lurked a more difficult challenge, the restless movements of the mind and heart. Removed from worldly distractions, the monk confronted a different battlefield, one fought in silence, with no audience, no glory, and no reward except the hope of divine grace. The battle with the self. The monk rose before dawn, prayed at appointed hours, and obeyed the rule with precision. Yet beneath these outward rhythms lay the constant struggle of self-denial. The human body resisted long fasts, sleepless vigils, and harsh winters in unheated cells. Hunger gnawed. Fatigue pressed. The rule demanded discipline, but the flesh demanded comfort. It was in this gap between desire and obedience that the monk's battle began. To endure cold nights, tasteless meals, or long stretches of silence was not easy. The hardest enemy was not the world outside, but the self within, the impatient thought, the wandering desire, the longing for warmth or companionship. The medieval monk understood this conflict as a spiritual war. Every temptation was not merely weakness but a dart from the devil, testing his resolve. The desert in the cloister. Though the monastery stood in fertile lands, the monk often thought of himself as a spiritual heir of the desert fathers, the early hermits who retreated into the Egyptian wilderness. Their struggles against hunger, thirst, and demons became models for the cloistered life. The cloister was not a literal desert, but it created its own barrenness. The monk gave up family, wealth, and worldly ambition. In return, he received silence and repetition. Days blurred, the same psalms, the same meals, the same stone walls. Time stretched long. This monotony itself was a form of testing. For while storms and wars might stir the world outside, within the cloister the battle was against boredom, distraction, and despair. To keep faith in such sameness required endurance greater than that demanded by sword or plough. The temptation of acedia. Among the monks, There was a name for one of the greatest dangers, acedia. It was more than simple laziness. It was a spiritual weariness, a mixture of boredom, restlessness, and despair. A monk suffering acedia might sit in his cell, staring at the wall, unable to pray or read. The hours felt endless. The thought would come, "Why am I here? What is the point of this labor? Would it not be better to return to the world?" This was called the noonday demon, for it often struck in the hot, still hours after lunch, when fatigue was heaviest and evening prayers seemed far away. It was not dramatic, but it was deadly. To surrender to acedia meant abandoning one's vows, slipping into bitterness or neglect. The remedy, according to the rule, was persistence. Keep working, keep praying, even when the spirit resisted. Stay in your cell, the early monks advised, and your cell will teach you everything, dreams and desires. Despite vows of chastity, the monk's mind was not free from desire. Dreams and memories stirred images of the life left behind. Family, friends, women, laughter, feasts. Some monks recorded visions of temptation in which demons appeared as alluring figures, whispering promises of pleasure. Others battled pride, the thought that their holiness set them above others. Still others struggled with envy, even within the cloister, envy of another's voice in chant, another's learning in scripture, another's closeness to the abbot. The monastery was a community, but community could be its own trial. Disputes, rivalries, and resentments tested the vow of humility. The monk had to learn not only to deny his own will but also to bear patiently with the faults of his brothers. The long passage of time. For a night, a single battle might define a lifetime. For a monk, the battle was stretched across decades. A young man might enter at 20 and live to 80, rising each day at the same bell, chanting the same psalms, walking the same cloister walk. This endurance required a different kind of courage, the courage of constancy. To remain faithful when no one watched, when no applause came, when each day seemed a copy of the last, was a trial as great as any faced on the field of war. Time itself was both an enemy and a companion. Seasons changed, brothers died, manuscripts wore thin. Yet the rule gave time a rhythm, shaping it into prayer. Vows divided the day, and within that structure, the monk learned to see eternity not in novelty but in repetition. Visions and consolations. Not all was struggle. Many monks reported visions of light during prayer, sudden moments of peace, or an overwhelming sense of divine presence. These were seen as gifts, consolations from God, rewards for long endurance. At times, chants in the chapel lifted the community into harmony so perfect it seemed a glimpse of heaven. At other times, the beauty of nature, the garden in spring, the quiet of snow on the cloister roof brought wordless consolation. Such moments did not erase struggle, but they gave strength to continue. The monk understood them not as the goal, but as signs along the road. Death and the final test. Ultimately, the monk's life was preparation for death. His habit, plain and simple, would also serve as his burial shroud. He lived each day with the reminder that earthly life was brief, eternity long. When illness came, the community gathered around him, chanting prayers as he lay in the infirmary. His death was not only his own trial, but also a reminder to the brothers. As he is now, so one day you shall be. For the monk, death was the final silence, the final release from the struggles of the flesh. If he endured faithfully, he hoped not for earthly fame, but for the eternal embrace of God. The hidden heroism of the cloister thus. The monk's battles were not fought with sword or shield, but with patience, prayer, and silence. His victories were unseen, his defeats known only to himself and to God. Yet, in this hidden heroism lay the strength of the cloister. The monk's struggle, though private, gave depth to his prayer, and his prayer, so he believed, gave strength to the world. The medieval monk lived not for glory, but for endurance. His was a life of constant struggle, yet also of constant hope, that in the silence of his cell, amid temptation and doubt, he might draw nearer to the eternal. Story 4. The Witch of the Village Fear. Folklore and the Silent Outcast. Section 1. The figure at the edge of the village. Every medieval village had its center. The church with its bell tower, the marketplace with its bustle, the well where women drew water. But just as surely, every village had its edge, the boundary, where fields gave way to forest, where paths turned uncertain, and where a lone cottage might stand. It was here, on the margins, that the figure of the witch was imagined. She was not always a person of power. Often she was simply the one who lived apart, the woman who knew herbs, or the widow without family, or the midwife whose skills frightened as much as they healed. The witch, in the eyes of the villagers, was never entirely ordinary. She stood just outside the circle of safety, belonging to the community yet never truly part of it. Her presence carried unease. To greet her was to wonder if misfortune might follow. To anger her was to fear the whispered curse. Thus she became the symbol of everything uncertain, the fragility of crops, the mystery of illness, the sudden death of animals, the storm that ruined the harvest. When such disaster struck, it was easier to imagine a neighbor's malice than to admit the randomness of fate. The witch became the explanation. Section 2. Folklore, Fear, and the Powers of the Witch. Folklore gave the witch her powers. To some, she was thought to boil herbs at night, muttering charms that could heal or harm. To others, she whispered with spirits, calling on forces no priest could bless. Children were told not to wander too close to her door, lest they be snatched away, baked into bread, or transformed into beasts. Tales varied from place to place. In some villages, witches were blamed for withered cows, spoiled milk, or barren fields. In others, they were believed to ride at night with dark spirits, leaving their bodies behind as their souls flew through the sky. Sometimes, the witch was thought to keep strange companions: a black cat, a toad, a raven, creatures said to be familiars, demons in animal form. Fear magnified her. A bent back became a sign of hidden power. A muttered complaint, followed by a neighbor's accident, was enough to make suspicion certainty. And yet, paradoxically, the same villagers who feared her often sought her out in secret. When the priest's prayers could not cure an illness, when childbirth grew dangerous, when charms for love or luck were needed, the witch might be approached. She was both outcast and necessary, shunned in public, but useful in private. In this way, folklore made her a mirror of the community's fears and desires. She was imagined as both destroyer and healer, threat and protector, cursed and needed. Section 3. The outcast and the shadow of the community. The witch was, above all, the outcast. Her isolation revealed the village's deepest anxieties about belonging. To be accused of witchcraft was to be named different, dangerous, and untrustworthy. In many cases, the accusation fell on those already vulnerable: the old, the poor, the widowed, the strange. When hardship struck, suspicion needed a target. A child's death, a failed harvest, a sickness spreading through the animals, such blows demanded explanation. The witch became the answer. In naming her, the village gave shape to its fear. In punishing her, it restored a fragile sense of order. But the truth was more complex. The witch was never only an individual. She was the shadow of the community itself. By casting out one figure, the village affirmed its unity. Her exclusion reinforced their belonging. Her supposed evil highlighted their supposed innocence. And yet, for all the fear and hatred, the figure of the witch never vanished. She lingered in stories, in whispered warnings, in children's games. She was the reminder of the world's uncertainty, the symbol of what could not be controlled. In this way, the witch became eternal, not just a woman on the edge of a medieval village, but an archetype of human society's need for both scapegoats and symbols. She stood as a reminder of the thin line between reverence and fear, between healer and outcast, between belonging and banishment.